It's great to be here today. Matt, thank you for properly pronouncing my name. I give a lot of these talks, and last time, actually, a couple weeks ago, I gave a talk, and someone said, we're going to hear now from a habit formation expert, a guy who runs a popular blog called nirandfar.com. Please welcome Nir. So anyway, my name is Nir. My blog is nirandfar.com, and it's really great to be here today. I owe a lot of gratitude, a debt of gratitude to the people at 500, and specifically Dave McClure. One of the first endorsements of this book, if you turned over the back of the book, would be from Dave. He was one of the first people to endorse it back when it was a self-published book. Today I actually want to talk about one of the things that was brought up in that video about the backlog. Right? How do you get stuff off the backlog? And what I want to do today is to try and figure out what is it about the world's most habit-forming products that we see reoccurring time and time again. Because when we talk about growth, we of course also have to talk about engagement and retention. We've all heard what a product that can't retain users is called. They're called leaky buckets. So you can figure out the most amazing growth channels, right, before anybody else figures out how to grow a company and acquire those users. But if you can't keep them coming back, if you can't keep them engaged, if you can't form these consumer habits, then you've got nothing, right? People won't stick around. So that's what we're going to dive in today. I will give you a bit of a disclaimer here that when I was asked to speak, I sent my slide presentation, and it was like 78 slides long, and they're like, okay, that's way too much. So instead what I decided to do is actually just keep it very, very short, because I realized that for this crowd, this is not a 101 crowd. A lot of you folks have been kind enough to read my book, which I'm very appreciative of. So what I want to do just for a few minutes is to dive into the model, walk you through the hook model for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with it, and then I want to leave lots and lots of time for your questions. Because the book, $14, you can buy it on Amazon. If you can't afford $14, I'll tell you where you can pirate it online. But either way, that's already been written. You can go figure that out on your own and read it in your own time. I want to get to the stuff, the burning questions that are on your mind right now that are not in the book. So does that sound good to you all? Yeah. Okay, great. So let me walk through really quickly these 4 basic steps that we find are embedded. They are designed into the world's most habit-forming products and services. So when you think about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat, all of these companies, whether it's enterprise products or consumer web, doesn't matter, these products that are habitual behaviors, these products that we use with little or no conscious thought, all have a hook. A hook is an experience designed to connect the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Okay? Connecting the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Now, the number one reason why your product will not be able to form a consumer habit is frequency. Frequency is a prerequisite for forming a consumer habit. Larry Page calls it the Toothbrush Test. He doesn't want to touch any product that is not going to be used as frequently as a toothbrush, twice a day. Now, my bar isn't quite that high. My bar is a week's time or less. If your product, if the behavior that you want people to do with little or no conscious thought does not occur within a week's time or less, you can forget this idea of forming a habit. It's probably not going to happen. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, first of all, this is not magic pixie dust. Right? This is not something that you pour on top of any company and poof, you're going to get the next Facebook. That's not how this works. Because not every business needs to form a consumer habit. Right? There are plenty of ways to bring people back to your product or service without a consumer habit. You can buy search engine or you can do search engine optimization. You can buy ads. You can open up a physical storefront. Right? There are lots of ways to bring people back. It's only if your business model requires unprompted engagement, people coming back on their own, that you need to form a consumer habit. If you think about it, all of those companies I just mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Slack, all of those companies, if they lose the consumer habit, they die. They go out of business. It's an existential threat to the company if they cannot bring you back on their own. If Facebook had to pay for ads to bring you back to Facebook, the business model collapses. So if that's the kind of business you're in, if you require habits to bring people back on their own, then you've got to have a hook. Let me walk you through these 4 basic steps of the hook. Every hook starts with a trigger. A trigger tells the user what to do next. It gives us some piece of information for what to do. And there are two types of triggers. We have external triggers, and we have internal triggers. External triggers, this is kind of where the land of growth hacking lives, right? It's all about optimizing these messages that tell the user what to do next with some piece of information. Click here, buy now, play this, a friend through word of mouth telling you what to do next. All examples of external triggers. Fantastic, we need those. But what product people don't tend to think about enough, and what turns out to be absolutely critical to forming a long-term habit with a product, is creating a mental association with what's called an internal trigger. An internal trigger is something that tells the user what to do next, but the information for what to do is stored as a memory or an association inside the user's brain. So what we do when we're in a particular place, in a particular situation, partaking in a routine, and most often when we experience certain emotions, all of these things prompt us to action, prompt us to find relief from the products and services that we use. Listen, there is only one reason that we use any product or service on our phone, offline, online, it doesn't matter. All of these products serve one need. Your product and everybody else's product only does one thing. They modulate our mood. That's what products do for us. They alleviate our pain. And the beauty of our profession, what we are able to do that other professions maybe aren't, is that we create these products and services that solve people's problems, that scratch their itch. But it's amazing to me how many times I go into a product team in my consulting practice, and we sit down for this big, expensive design review, and they show me all the amazing technical bells and whistles of what their product can do. But when I ask them, okay, but what's the consumer's itch? What's the frequently occurring internal trigger that your product is going to attach to? They haven't a clue. They can't tell me. So if you're going to build a habit-forming product or service, you have got to be able to articulate what is that internal trigger. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty. What's the emotion that you are going to be the solution for every time the user feels that pain point? We're not creating these internal triggers. Okay, let's be very clear. Okay? The point of what we do here, the point of these persuasive technologies, is to find those moments in time, to find those itches, and cater to them, serve them, provide the solution to that discomfort, frequently enough to form a consumer habit. So that's the first step. Find your user's internal trigger and closely couple that internal trigger with an external trigger that tells the user what to do next. By the way, that's the secret to an external trigger, to a message, a notification, an email that feels like spam, and one that feels like magic, is one word. And that one word is context, right? Context. The closer together you can couple the moment in time the user gets that external trigger with when they feel the internal trigger, when they feel boredom, uncertainty, fatigue, whatever it is that your internal trigger is that you're going to capture, the closer you can couple those two things together, the more likely that external trigger is to be responded to. That's when it feels like magic, right? Okay, so that's the trigger phase. The next step of the hook is the action phase. The action is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest thing the user can do to get relief from their itch. It's a scroll on Pinterest. It's searching on Google. It's pushing the play button on YouTube. The very simplest thing that you can do to provide immediate relief for the user. The goal of all technology, and I don't care if it's the cotton gin or the iPhone, the goal of all technology is to shorten the distance between the recognition of the need and the reward, the alleviation of that discomfort. And that's what your product has to do in the simplest way possible. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to designing for action, but this is really, for this crowd, we all know this fundamentally, that we've got to make that key behavior as easy as possible to do. Let's move on to the next step of the hook. The third step of the hook is the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user gets what they came for. It's where their itch is scratched a little bit. Okay? Now, it turns out that it's not good enough for these habit-forming products to just scratch the user's itch. turns out that there also needs to be this element of variability involved. Some of the research that went into this line of thinking came from B.F. Skinner. Many of you remember Skinner from your first psychology class back in college, the father of operant conditioning, right? Skinner took these little pigeons, he put them in a box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a reward, a little food pellet. And at first, every time this pigeon pecked at the disc and got this food pellet, they basically Skinner could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. Great, that's called operant conditioning. But then Skinner did something a little different. Actually, Skinner started to run out of these food pellets. He was running short. And he started giving them every other time, or just kind of randomly. And what he found was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. And of course, this is at the heart of all sorts of products that we use throughout our days with little or no conscious thought. Right? There are these variable rewards of going through your news feed on Pinterest or LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. That news feed mechanic of scrolling and searching uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine. Okay? Same exact psychology at work, these variable rewards keeping people engaged. Now, not all products want to insert variability. Okay? Sometimes inserting variable rewards makes a product more interesting. So for example, if the internal trigger is boredom, well then variable rewards, inserting those variable rewards, for instance in a game, for example, will make that product more interesting. It makes it more entertaining, and it scratches that internal trigger of boredom. But if the internal trigger is something else, that same variable reward may not work. So for example, a product like Uber or Google, for that matter, these products and services do not want to insert variability because the product itself is already variable. The situation of typing in a search query has inherent variability. I'm looking for the answer to my question. So variability, inserting variable reward, is only good for the user if the user is in control. If you think about it, if your laptop just, okay, that's a surprise. That's variable. Didn't expect that, right? But why doesn't that feel good? Why isn't that engaging and fun? Because you are not in control of that situation. So in situations where the user wants to, where we want to insert more variability, that would be in the situation where we want to scratch this internal trigger of boredom, for example. But in a situation where the user is uncertain and wants greater agency and control, we want to give that to the user. So for example, Uber, same situation, would not want to insert variability because the situation is already variable. If you remember a few years ago when we would call a taxi cab, right? You call up the cab company, and you call the dispatcher, and you'd say, well, how long until my taxi cab's going to be here? The answer was always the same. 10 minutes. Go outside, we'll see you on the corner about 10 minutes. Because the dispatcher had no clue when that taxi cab was going to be there. Well, here comes Uber and Lyft and gives us this little Pac-Man interface where we can see exactly how far our ride is, giving us greater agency and control over something that is inherently variable. Principally, this uncertainty around, can I get to where I'm going on time? Okay? So in some situations, products want to insert variable rewards. Other times, they want to give the user greater agency and control over something that's inherently variable. Okay? Finally, the last step of the hook, and perhaps the most important and overlooked of the 4 steps of the hook, is the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of a future benefit. Okay, it's not about immediate gratification. That's what the action phase is for. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of a future reward. It's something that makes the product better and better with use. Now, the investment phase, the point of the investment phase, is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And investments do this in 2 ways. The first way is by loading the next trigger. So when a product like a messaging service like WhatsApp or Slack, for example, when you send someone a message on WhatsApp or Slack, you're loading the next trigger because you're likely to get a reply. And that reply comes coupled with an external trigger, some kind of notification that brings you through the app once again. So it's not some piece of spammy messaging from you. It's something that I did to bring myself back. Okay? The second way is by storing value. Now, storing value is a really big deal. Storing value is why I work in technology as opposed to making physical things like these chairs, my clothing, everything in the physical world, all of these things made out of atoms, they lose value with use, right? With wear and tear, they depreciate. But habit-forming technologies can do the opposite. Habit-forming technologies should appreciate with use. They should get better and better the more we use them. And they do this by collecting data, by collecting content, followers, and reputation. Those four things, all those four things, data, content, reputation, and which one did I miss? Data, content, reputation, and followers. Those four things increase the value of the service with use. That's a really, really big deal. Why is it such a big deal? Because when I accrue data in a service, and it becomes better and better for me, I accrue followers, I upload content, or I have a reputation, these things make the product a little bit sticky. It makes it a little hard to leave, which brings me to the cold, hard conclusion. Folks, there is no rule that I have ever seen, there is no 11th commandment that says the best product wins. That's a lie. It is not the best product that wins. Silicon Valley graveyards are full of companies that had the best technological solution. It's not the best product that wins. It's the product that can capture the monopoly of the mind that captures the market. Because it's through successive cycles, through these hooks, the trigger, the action, the reward, and the investment, this is how habits are formed. This is how consumer preferences are shaped. So if you're building a product or service that requires a consumer habit, you've got to be able to answer these 5 fundamental questions of, number 1, what's the internal trigger that your product is addressing? What's the external trigger that prompts the user to action, to take the key behavior? What is that key behavior, and what's the simplest behavior that the user can do to get their reward? Number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, the investment. What's the bit of work that your user is doing to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? Now, that was really, really fast. I'm sorry that I had to kind of rush through that. I really wanted to make time for as many questions as possible. But before we take questions, I have a quick favor to ask. I have a little tradition. Can you guys hold up your phones for me? Can you hold up your phones? Thank you so much. There's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, I want to get a quick picture from my Instagram page. Say cheese, everybody. Cheese. Beautiful. The second reason I just did that was to demonstrate this principle of how we can get people to do a behavior when it is easier to do. And now that you have your phone in your hand, going to this URL is easier. All right? So I would love to hear what you thought of my little presentation here. Would love your feedback. Those 70 slides that I told you about, by the way, that I didn't show you, they are all available here. As soon as you fill out that survey, you'll get a link to my SlideShare page where you can get all the slides that basically explain what I just talked about here today. There's a lot more there as well. That's the reward. You can see I practice what I preach. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you very much. Oh, can we leave that last slide up for just a second so everybody can get that URL? And maybe we'll take a few by hand, just if anybody wants to. Yes, please.
So could you please talk a bit about like your view on personas versus job to be done?
Personas versus job to be done. So I think there's lots of ways to skin a cat. And when it comes to building great products and services, there are many ways to get to the same ends. And I think what's useful about building customer personas, building customer narratives, or this jobs to be done framework is getting to the internal trigger. So whatever gets you to this insight of what's the frequently occurring internal trigger, what's the thing that the user feels at least once a week, preferably several times a day, that we can scratch, that we can cater to. So what typically happens with companies I work with is that they'll triangulate. They'll build a user narrative. They'll look for nascent behaviors. They'll build a persona. They'll think about the jobs to be done. All of these are tools at your disposal. But what I want to know when a company comes and pitches me is what's the internal trigger you're going to vie for? What's the thing that when the user feels, they automatically reach for your solution? That's the most important answer. How you get there, I don't really care. Please. Oh, go for it.
Hey, so with the advent of the Internet of Things and these smart hardware technologies, do you see a possibility where people start applying habit-forming systems, habit-forming techniques to physical things?
Yeah, I think that there are already habits with physical things. If you think about how every morning, whether I'm thirsty or not, I'm making a cup of coffee, right? That's already a habit. It's something I do with little or no conscious thought. I think that what we're missing today that's going to change the game a bit is that now we're going to bolt on the investment phase. So I'm not loyal to my coffee maker. Right? If somebody came, and this has happened a lot over the past, I love coffee, and when somebody convinces me about some new bullshit way to make coffee, I'll buy it hook, line, and sinker. Right? I'm not loyal to that. Why? Because I haven't invested in my coffee maker. What does the future look like? Because you've got trigger, action, reward in my existing coffee maker. What does it look like when you add investment? When you start collecting data about my preferences, right? Now it becomes sticky. Now I can't toss out that coffee maker that's collecting all this data because it knows exactly how I like my coffee and when to turn off and when to turn on. So that bit of collecting that information improves the service with use, and that's where you have a significant competitive advantage. Now it's going to be very difficult for the new coffee maker to come along because now I will lose all that data if I move to this new coffee maker. All those preferences are gone. So I think that's what we're going to see with this Internet of Things. That's the opportunity here, is to bolt on the investment phase where it doesn't currently exist. Yeah, thanks for your question. Please.
The stack is unfolded or decoded across cultures. For example, like they were talking about earlier, like Selena Gomez doesn't translate exactly.
Yeah. So for sure, those steps of the hook, where it changes in terms of cultural preferences, it changes in several aspects, but one of the most important is the reward phase. Because not only are people different across cultures, people are different across individuals, right? So what Brian likes and what's rewarding for him is not going to be rewarding for me. So it's not that the model changes, the model stays the same, but what is rewarding to your particular audience, your particular user base, is just going to be different from other user bases. So it's not that the model itself changes, it's just that we need to understand our audience to make sure, fundamentally, what is the internal trigger, and are we going to scratch that itch in the reward phase? Yeah, let's take some of these. 38. Do you have a list of commonly used triggers that SaaS products companies successfully use? So I think some of the most, when it comes to the enterprise space, a lot of these triggers are things that we can, if we put some thought into, we can assess pretty easily, right? I think one of the most common is uncertainty around what I should do today. If you think about what a product like Salesforce or Slack to some extent. Slack is workplace FOMO. Or just the good old calendar. Why are people checking their calendar several times a day? It's around this uncertainty, this question, this stress of what am I supposed to be doing right this minute. So I think workplace uncertainty, there's financial stress when it comes to why we would use certain products and services. I think that, and then this workplace FOMO is a big one. What I always like to look for is nascent behaviors. What are people already doing offline that we are going to make better online? So Slack's success is not that surprising. A product like this had to emerge one way or the other because people were doing this. They had this internal trigger of, hey, what's going on? And that's why they would go to the water cooler and have a conversation with their colleagues, right? So these new products and services are taking old internal triggers, old itches, and just porting them online and making them easier to use, easier to scratch those internal triggers through this digital product. OK. By the way, on my SlideShare page, I have an entire presentation around the hook model that is just for enterprise products, by the way. So my book is mostly about consumer web products, because that's the products that all of us use and know well. Just enterprise examples, that's on my SlideShare page, too. Would you call it a habit if people who, would you call it a habit if people who only travel 1 to 3 times a year only think of, say, Expedia? If it's not a habit, what is it that makes them think of Expedia can scratch that itch? OK. I'm going to offend some people here. I generally do not like the travel space when it comes to forming new habits because of the frequency problem, right? And I would, and I've actually worked with Expedia as a client, and this is a problem that everyone in the travel space has, is it's extremely hard to form a new consumer habit without sufficient frequency. And the fact is, most people just don't travel enough to ever form a habit with a website like Expedia. So I would contend, and this is something that I've seen the data to back up, that it's actually not Expedia.com that people go to, unfortunately. And Expedia hates that. You know where they go? Where's the habit? Where's the habit? Before I get to Expedia, where do people go? They go to Google, right? It's freaking Google that has the habit, and Expedia hates that. Because what that means is that they are beholden to renting somebody else's eyeballs. They always have to pay to get attention based on the backs of somebody else's habit, right? The Google habit, the Facebook habit. So the power of these habit-forming technologies is that they don't have to spend money to that extent to bring people back. Now, so what do you do? What do you do if you're in this space? So there's one company I've invested in called Pana. And Pana is in the travel space. It's the only company I've invested in the travel space. And it is a habit-forming product because they have catered to a certain type of user, like me, who is doing something travel-related every other day. So I travel at least twice a month, giving a workshop or a speaking engagement. I use something related to travel nearly every single day. So Pana said, we're going to just focus on that market, not to this market of people who don't use a travel product frequently. Okay? The other thing you can do, you can bolt on habit-forming experiences onto non-habit-forming products. So for example, there are two C's here, right? The first C is content, and the second C is community. So when it comes to content, a company I like to highlight, many of you have heard of Y Combinator, right? Signing up to apply to Y Combinator, that is never going to be a habit-forming product. But Y Combinator has this content site. What's it called? Hacker News, right? So this content consumption habit, and it's branded, right? There's a big Y at the top and a big Y at the bottom that says apply here. So they create this content consumption habit so that eventually the result of engagement is this eventual monetization event, right? And that's what you can do as well. Williams-Sonoma does this really well too. They have one of the best cooking content sites on the web, not just for a retailer, on the web in general. They're publishing 3 or 4 articles a day, and this content generation machine creates a habit of consuming content with Williams-Sonoma so that the result of all that engagement eventually will be that the consumer monetizes by buying some kind of cookware. You can also bolt on community. Let me give you a terrific example that I'm guessing nobody in this room has heard of. Is anybody here by chance a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club? Anybody? Hallmark Keepsake? No. You are, really? No. Shoot. OK, check this out. You laugh, right? Christmas ornaments, right? The most infrequently used bought product you could probably think of, right? How many people buy Christmas ornaments in the middle of the year? Turns out a lot. There are 350,000 members in the United States alone who are members of this Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club. What the hell? Well, it didn't make any sense to me. Well, as I dug deeper, it turns out that people don't join this club to buy ornaments. The ornaments is just the vehicle to give people what they really want, which is community. It's being understood by other people and understanding them in return. People need other people. The keepsake ornaments, these Christmas ornaments, are just the tool for people to get together. They are talking over email. They're getting together for dinners. They even, by the way, I know this is going to really excite many of you. One of the benefits of being in the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club is that you are invited to help package the new ornaments when they come to the store. Yes. That is a privilege that you are able to get. It's crazy, right? It's free labor. Why would anybody pay for that privilege? Well, they do because when they come to the store and package these keepsake ornaments, they're interacting with other people. They built a community habit around an infrequently used product, a product that will never become a habit. Okay? So that's the two ways. You can either bolt on community, bolt on content habit to a non-habit forming product, or find a way to make it something that is consumed more frequently by going after a different demographic. Cool. Where was I? Variable rewards often linked to addiction, such as a slot machine spawning gambling addiction. What is our ethical obligation around putting addicting, distracting dynamics into our products? OK, I love this question. Thank you for whoever asked that. I care deeply about ethics. In fact, I can always tell who hasn't read my book because they're like, oh, you wrote that book on addiction. Well, I didn't write the book on addiction, and I did that explicitly because the book is called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, not How to Build Addictive Products, because addiction has a very specific definition. An addiction is a compulsive dependency to a product is a compulsive dependency to a behavior or a product that harms the user. Okay? So this is something, an addiction, the definition of this addiction is something that you want to stop using, but can't, and harms you. Okay? A persistent compulsive dependency to this behavior or substance that harms the user. So for the vast majority of people, when we think about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp, these products aren't really addictions. Right? If we look at ourselves in the mirror and say, could we stop using this product if we wanted to? And does it harm us? The answer is, yeah, we probably could stop using it, and it doesn't really harm us. There's lots of good things in the world that are just really good without being addictive, right? I go to work. I have sex. I eat food. I'm not a sex addict or a food addict or a workaholic, right? Because we're not using them to the extent where it harms. Now, for those people who actually are addicted, and there are a proportion of our population, between 1% to 5%, the stats are showing us, that are actually addicted, who are saying to us, I want to stop, but I can't. And for those people, we have an ethical responsibility to help those folks. And I'm working with companies. I've talked to Facebook and Snapchat and other companies, Reddit, and I'm trying to persuade them that if a customer is actually addicted, we have a moral responsibility. It's not ethical to go after those people, and it's not ethical to do nothing and sit by when they tell us they need help. Now, the beauty is that for the first time, these interactive technologies can help us help these folks who need our assistance, right? Unlike alcohol or other addictive products, addiction's been around for a very, very long time. Unlike these other addictive products, if you were someone who made an addictive product, let's say you were an alcohol distiller, you could throw up your hands and say, well, I don't know who the addicts are. I can't do anything for them. How do I know who the alcoholics are? But these companies know, right? We know. We, the people in this room, we know how much our customers are using these products and services. And so I think that I'm quite optimistic that if these companies wanted to, and I think you'll see more of them hopefully doing something, they can pinpoint the addicts. There's a very small proportion of the population that is actually addicted. Now, that's actually not the real problem. The real problem is not that a few companies have gotten really good at being really good. The real problem is that the vast majority of technology doesn't suck us in, not the way Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp does. The real problem is that most technology sucks, right? The real problem is that too many people haven't read my book yet, and they're making products and services that are really hard and really unfun to use, right? Think about interacting with a local business, a local restaurant, interacting with a government services website. These things are horrible. They're awful, right? So the real problem is that far too many products and services are not habit-forming enough. They're not engaging enough. Not that a few companies have done it really, really well. Okay? I hope that answers that question. How do you handle the criticism that the hook model is just a manipulation method? Yeah, it absolutely is a manipulation method. It is any time that you are getting people to do things that you want them to do for a commercial purpose, that is a form of manipulation. But there's a big difference. There's two types of manipulation. There's persuasion and there's coercion. Both are manipulation. Persuasion is helping people do things they want to do. And again, the power of habit-forming technology is to help people do things they want to do, but because the product design is so shitty, they don't do. Right? That's the power of what we can do to change people's lives, that we can help them do things they want to do, eating more healthfully, connecting with people they love, living happier lives by helping them do things they want to do. Coercion is something else. Coercion is getting people to do things they don't want to do. That I'm not for. I don't even know how to do. And it's not what my book is about in any way, shape, or form. It's all about persuasive technology, not coercive technology. I don't think that these companies that try and coerce people stay in business very long. Why? Because people are pretty smart, guys, right? You can't trick people for very long before they say, hey, you know what? This product is hurting me. It's not helping me, and they stop using it. So I hope that, does that answer that question? I hope. What is the best hook? The best hook is love. The best hook is love. Because the biology of why we respond to these products and services is because it is built into our DNA. Hooks have existed well before Facebook, well before the iPhone, well before any of these technologies. Hooks have existed in romance, right? The variable reward of when you first meet somebody, and do they like you? And how is your first date going to go? And all this uncertainty, those are variable rewards. It is built into our DNA to keep us engaged. The same brain circuitry that keeps us reading an interesting novel, watching an interesting television show, the same thing that makes sports interesting or friendships fun, is the exact same psychology that makes these products worth using. Is there an exercise you recommend to discover the high-frequency actions that might exist even in a seemingly low-frequency product? Zillow and searching a home value versus. So there are certain products and services, I think that's what this is asking, where during a habit or during a certain period of time, people have this frequently occurring problem. So for example, when you're job hunting, you feel that itch, that uncertainty of, oh, I need a job. You're feeling that very often. Okay? And in that period of time, you're browsing LinkedIn, or when you're shopping for a home, you're on Zillow every day, several times a day. The trouble with those businesses, of course, is that after you've solved the consumer's problem, you found the job, you found the home, they're not engaged with you until another 4 or 5 years, which can be a problem. So the idea here is this is where you would bolt on content and community to keep people engaged between these lags. So for example, LinkedIn started as a resume company, or started as this online business profile company. They very quickly found that people don't look for jobs all that frequently, and today, LinkedIn is no longer a resume company, it's a content company, right? The main experience around LinkedIn is looking for interesting content within your industry. Okay, I think my time is up. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for these fantastic questions. If I didn't answer your question, one quick tip. On my website, nirandfar.com, if I didn't get to your question, there's a link there that says schedule time with me. I do office hours every week for free, 15-minute increments. If you've read the book and you have a question, something's not working out for you, and just want to pick my brain for a bit, I'd love to hear from you. You can schedule time.